Awesome. Well, why don't we just get started? I know some people are struggling to get in, and I've resent them the link in case they've got issues. But welcome everybody. It's a very informal gathering, so I know it's called a webinar, but it's more of a get together of like-minded people. As I was saying, my name's Saad Qureshi. I know some of you met some of you for the first time. So I used to work in a global education company for a number of years. I left that company in December 2022. Was really pleased to, I led a global workforce of 200 people, had about 40, 50 managers. And a long story short, I really enjoyed coaching my team, leading leaders and supporting my 40, 50 managers to upskill, discover new ways of working. And I thought, well, when I leave, what am I going to do? And that prompted me to set up something and get more involved in this kind of space where I can help people upskill middle managers. So the company Metron, thanks to the Metron team for organizing all of this, doing the promotion behind the scene and just getting it out there. Metron as a company, we researched the lived experiences of middle managers. Many of them feel alone. We had a lot of anecdotal experiences that they were left to get on with it and learn what it means to be a manager. And every time I speak to people, there's lots of nodding of heads and people can relate to it. We did a research middle of last year called The Big Leap, and we interviewed 50 managers, deep dive interviews, and that research revealed a lot of good findings. I'll probably put that in the chat later. For example, only 23% have had an induction on what it means to be a manager, and 70% felt that they didn't really understand the roles or expectations of a manager. So even though a lot of the stuff that we put together is designed for people in at any level, and so we decided to put the crossover webinar series. So we've got 6 others in the year. I'll pop the link again in the chat at some point during this session, just so you can get a bit more of an understanding of some other sessions that are coming up. Special shout out to Craig, which I'm going to introduce now. Craig and I, we've known each other for I've lost count. Too many years.
7 years, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
7 years. And whenever we talk, you can't stop us. And Craig's just really passionate about protecting the mind, creating safe environments for learning, and understanding how we can create behavioral change and through cultural business projects. And he's leading quite a large number of those projects. Done a lot of different work in the creative media industry, in higher education, and is currently with Goldsmiths University doing quite an interesting change project there with some colleagues who are very, sort of old school thinking. That's what he's doing, and he's also a master practitioner in neurolinguistic programming, which is all about the mind, and that informs his philosophy and how he works with people. Hopefully, I haven't embarrassed you too much there, Craig, but
No, that's great.
great. So that outline of the session is that I'm gonna hand over to Craig. He's gonna do his thing. I'm insignificant here. It's all about yourselves and getting to learn more. And we'll do that for about 20-25 minutes, and then there'll be a bit of a Q&A at the end for Craig. And yeah, if you've got any other suggestions or thoughts, you can do. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. I'm gonna hand over to Craig. Over to you. Thanks so much again.
Great, thanks so much. Welcome everybody. Lovely to see you all. As Saad said, I'm Craig, and I've got a varied background in media and higher education, and in leadership. And I also work as a coach through my NLP work as well. So a whole range of things. And I think something that I'm just really interested in learning. I'm fascinated by the idea of developing and our ability to, as people, to connect and to adapt and to grow and to nurture our own growth and each other's growth. And that's I think one of the things that attracted me to work in education, but also since then discovering coaching and being able to tailor learning, for helping people find their own relevant pathways and tools, the things that work for them in learning. So I've prepared some slides. So we've got a bit of a framework, so something, so it's not just me chatting for a while. We'll go through those and then have a bit of a Q&A at the end. And as Sada said, it is a small gathering, so I'd really love it to be informal. And please do feel free to to interrupt. And if I speak too quickly, tell me to slow down. I tend to do that when I get excited. If there's something that's not clear and you want a bit of clarification, then again, please just shout, and that's absolutely fine. Just feel free to interrupt. It's a small gathering. So first of all, I want to just sort of chat a bit about the idea of contracting, and which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with, and a learning container. So for today, and whatever we're discussing and exploring today, I thought it'd be great just to, given that we're a small group, just to sort of chat about, if there are there any particular things that anyone feels is important for them to get as much as you can out of the session today. Whether that's things that you might need, things that you want us to be aware of, or things that would help you feel sort of safe in sharing and get the most out of it. So feel free to share or to put things in the chat as suits you. Just dive in. What kind of things might help us feel comfortable and safe in our learning today? So feel free to write in the chat there. Something for me that I can happy to kick it off, but feel free to talk as well, to unmute and jump in verbally. I think it's a couple of things for me are to respect that everybody's opinion is a truth for them, and its opinion, not so we might state things as if they're factual, and it's important to have a sense of mutual respect. So that's something for me that I think is important, and with that, to entertain a space of curiosity. Even if it's something that we maybe don't agree with or is new for us that we don't understand, to maybe say, oh, actually, I wonder how that might be true. So yes, mutual respect, Emmanuel. Thanks for that. Space for experimentation. Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Medea. I think it's really good to have that space to be able to explore ideas together without worrying about whether it's right. There are no silly questions. Is it a sensible thing to ask or not? If you thought it's absolutely a sensible thing to ask, and a really great way to learn is to explore and to experiment. So I think that's really good to have that space. Something else that I think for me is useful is to have the idea. Oh, sorry, there was that hand up and disappeared.
Yeah, that was me. I just
Just
wanted to add,
jump in, please.
just to like an extension of what already discussed by you and another, I think, Emmanuel, like about mutual respect. Like I think another thing is like just to respect the fact that like there are certain elements that might work in certain areas, in certain cultures, and it might So I think like everybody listens to each other and stuff, but also the understanding that it might work in this context, but might not work in this context.
Thank you. Such a good point. Such a good point. Yeah, absolutely right. And I've experienced that in my own learning growing up. I've lived in lots of different countries, in different cultural contexts around the world, and that's certainly been my experience in learning. The importance of cultural respect, expectance, and difference and variation. But also as an educator, I've had the pleasure to work internationally and seeing and experiencing how different cultures approach the same degrees within the same institution can have such a different approach. So that's a really important one. Thank you so much for that.
Yes.
Anyone else? Okay, well, that's great. So, with that, please feel free, as I said, as part of this, in terms of feeling comfortable, to jump in at any point, to share, and with that, maybe there's an idea of Chatham House rules that it's not confidentiality, but we, if we share things that are said in this call, we don't attribute it to the person who said it. And that just sort of helps create a bit of a safer space for us to feel able to share. Okay, so the whole point of that is that I really want this to feel like it's not just a safe space, but a supportive safe space, and that we're able to to listen to each other's thoughts and to have discussion and to challenge and to explore where things might be true and where not, and where they might be different, and have a conversation and dialogue. So first of all, kick off to get us going. A question for you. So I'd like you to take a minute to think of a recent time when you've learnt something new, and that can be anything at all. It doesn't have to be formal education or formal learning or training. It could be something that you've learned. I don't know, you've learned to cook a new dish at home. It might be you've learned a new language. It might be you've learned how to tie a bow or something on a gift package in a different way. Anything at all. It doesn't really matter what level it is. Just have a think about something that you've learned to do new. And as you're thinking about that thing, fantastic. Yeah, Saad's jumped straight in there, learned to ski. Brilliant. I want to see the evidence of that in photographs. So with that, I'd like to now think about the question, what is it, or what was it that made that learning impactful for you? Thinking about that learning experience, what was it that made the learning impactful for you? And of course, there might be a range of things, and you don't have to share. If you want to share, you can. Saad's leading the way here. The purpose of this, really, for clarity, is for your thought process, so that you've got a personal reference point and frame for what we're going to explore over the next 45 minutes or so. So interesting. People who are bilingual have different personalities. Yes, I would agree with that from my personal experience. I'm bilingual on a fluency level, and have sort of low level conversational on a few other languages, and it's certainly affected. I can see how I am different compared to when I was monolingual, and I can recognize that in others. So bearing that in mind, sorry.
Sorry, I want to just add on to that. I didn't mean that they're like schizophrenic or anything. It's just that when they're speaking in one language, their approach is different, or they're totally different, you know. And when they're in maybe speaking in their mother tongue, it's a totally different approach. And what I learned from that is that because where I work is bilingual, Arabic and English. So when we are, designing workshops or presentations, I learned that maybe it's not a good idea every time just to put someone and say, okay, you can just do the translation, go ahead and do ad hoc translation. So it made me realize, okay, I need to think back and also think about their, feelings, that you just can't say, oh yeah, they're fluent in second language and they can easily translate.
Really good point. And languages have different structures that reflect, and they're linked to culture as well. So there are things that you can express in a certain way in one language which you can't in another. And we'll talk a little bit about linguistics, or touch on it briefly in a short while. So thank you for that. So hold those thoughts with you, and as a reference point as we go through something that you've learned, and what was it that made that learning impactful. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at some challenges in impactful learning. We're going to do a whistle-stop tour of some concepts around brain-based learning, and how adults learn differently to children in particular. So that in the context of L&D specifically. A little bit about neurolinguistic programming, which is part of my practice and background, and behavior and behavioral change with that. I've got a couple of case studies of examples from my work experience when I've used different tactics to see what the issues were and what the outcomes have been. And I've got some sort of quick tools that you might want to think about and try taking forward if they're useful for you. And time permitting, to have a bit of an open discussion and chat about your scenarios and any questions you might have. So diving into some of the challenges in impactful learning. There are several challenges, and I'm sure these will be familiar to you. We have a challenge with motivation in particular. If staff aren't motivated, and thinking about L&D particularly now in the workplace learning environment, motivation and time are two major factors. Other ones are clarity of outcomes. What is it that we're actually asking people to do, and what's the purpose of it? Another one is differentiation. So by differentiation, I mean, what's the range of levels of prior experience and skill set and understanding in a group of people who'll be engaging in a certain L&D activity or course or program or study. the level they're at, the prior knowledge is going to have a huge impact on their ability to feel good about what they're doing and or to feel stretched to that they're actually getting something out of it. And that affects their engagement. The engagement will affect their ability to get something out of it and to make it meaningful and impactful. Measurability is another challenge with learning and L&D. How do we measure the impact and the outcome of what's going on, and particularly where it's leading to behavioral change? Accessibility is another one. Being mindful of different people's needs and things that might inhibit their learning or be blockers to accessing not just content, but accessing the concept. So we touched on this a bit already in terms of linguistics and culture. Those are two really, really good examples of where we might want to consider accessibility as barriers to learning through engagement. Learning styles is another one. There's a lot of debate around the sort of theories of learning styles. With that learning styles, we mean basically the kind of preferences that people have in terms of what makes learning most accessible for them. If there's a massive mismatch in learning styles, it presents a barrier and you're not going to get engagement, and then you're not going to get impact from it. And a really important one, as you've spotted as a bit of a theme for today, is the idea of feeling safe. Do our colleagues and the people who are engaging in the learning activities that we've designed feel safe to engage in those activities and that content in the way that we've intended? If they don't feel safe, they won't. And a key part of learning, as I'm sure you know and we'll explore in a minute, is about the ability to fail and to trial and error. And if we don't feel safe, we're not going to try and error. So if these things don't happen, behaviors don't change. And again, in context of L&D, we're oftentimes looking for behavioral change in short term. So looking at brain-based learning as a broad concept, brain-based learning is about the idea that the brain changes. It's not fixed, it's plastic. And learning is compounded and strengthened when we build connections on existing connections and when we create new connections, when we engage in activities, when we do something new, when we challenge ourselves, when we use our brain like a muscle, it expands, it makes new connections. Emotion and motivation are key parts of this, and positive emotions like curiosity and joy really have a strong impact on engagement. And again, if we've got people engaged, they're more likely to get beneficial, impactful learning, which can be measured and applied. Negative emotions like stress are a blocker for learning and also for creativity, and those two are very, very closely linked. Multisensory learning. So the idea that the more senses we use for learning, the more impactful it's going to be. It's going to have a much stronger effect. So if we learn through acquisition, for instance, through just reading a text or being told something, it's going to have quite a small impact, or the retention of the learning is going to be relatively low. When we start to add in other aspects, other dimensions, other senses, so visuals, images, not just text, linking with the auditory, and the ability to touch and to move as well, our bodily experience, and motoric learning and muscle memory, then it becomes a much more integrated effect and a strong effect. And a little metaphor, I think, an idea with this is to compare that to a nice meal. You can look at it, you can look at a picture of a beautiful meal on a menu and you think, wow, that's nice, and a lot's left up to your imagination. But when you get to touch the food and to feel the texture, it brings on another dimension, the third dimension. And then when you get to taste it, then it all starts to come to life. But even the taste really is only an inhibited or a restricted experience until you bring smell into it. And when suddenly you let smell into the experience, the whole thing explodes and it all comes together. It's a really nice little metaphor for learning. Engage more senses, get people to do things differently, and it's going to be a stronger experience. So relating to that, active learning, keep people active. There's a lot of research, to show that the more active people are in a learning process, the more they participate, the more they're doing things, the more they're trying things, the more they're learning through experimentation, the stronger the impact of learning. And at the top of the pile on this one is teaching as a really great way of being active, but also turning it around. And there are all sorts of Edgar Dale and John Hattie and all sorts of people who have done research to demonstrate this, that when we teach something, it has the strongest impact on learning. That's when we really, really get it in a different way, and all the different aspects come together when we have to turn something around from internalizing it and explain it to somebody else, because we're forced to really bring it down to the base components, the core components. But we can only do that once we've explored the entirety of it and developed a practice. So get people to teach something if you really want them to get good at learning. And relating to that is practice. Learning takes time, repetition. Get people to do something, but don't just do it once. Get them to apply it, get them to repeat it. So in terms of learning design, a really good trick with this is don't just do something once. Don't have a workshop. Don't just have an away day, but stagger it over a month or a couple of months so that you have recurring elements of iteration of the same topic. If you want people to develop a feedback culture, for instance, don't just get them in to do a webinar or a talk or a 2-hour workshop on feedback. That's a really great start. And get them to practice their feedback, then get them to come back a week later and reflect on it and share, and then get them to do it again, and get them to work through the cycles of evaluation and planning and action and reflection and evaluation, going through those loops to really solidify what they're doing. There are all sorts of theories around learning. Brain-based learning is just one of them. There are lots. The important thing for me, I guess it's similar to the point that was made earlier about cultural context, is to look at what works for you and to be willing to be flexible and to adapt things. So pick the frameworks that you think are relevant for your situation, and pick the bits from a framework that are useful for that as concepts, and look around to other frameworks as well. You're not going to get a one-size-fits-all.
I think Sharifa had her hand up.
Yes,
feel
please.
free. It's
Let's
very
pause
informal,
there.
so you don't need to put your hand up. You could come off mute or put it in the chat. But yeah, go for it, Sharifa, if you still have a question.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question. If could mentoring also help someone learn, in your opinion?
Absolutely, absolutely. So do you mean as being a mentor, not a mentee?
Yes, being as a mentor, yes.
Yeah, as a mentor, absolutely. Because for me, that would fall into the category of teaching. You are supporting somebody in an advisory capacity. Now, there's a bit of a difference between mentoring and coaching. It's a fine line, very closely related. And for me, the difference is advice, where coaching is about asking questions and getting the person to explore their own issues and identify them and explore their own solutions and solidify them. You're just a guide, whereas a mentor is more coming in with advice, and absolutely really good way to do that, because you're listening to a problem in your field, or something that whatever the topic is that you're wanting the person to become better at. And while you're listening to the person who you're mentoring, you are having to listen, to process, to evaluate what their issues are, and then draw on your experience and summarize that to come up with some useful suggestion and advice. So that's and then you get to see what they do with it and how well that works. So you're kind of on both teaching and being able to observe somebody putting it into practice by proxy. It's a really good way to do that.
And just to build on that, if I could, Craig, I think there are like a resurgence now of shadowing and mentoring schemes, and lots of platform and tools out there now where you can facilitate people connecting with each other. I think we're doing that quite well now, better than we used to, even in the L&D community. People mentoring one another, which is a really great way of learning new things. There's also another question in the chat. I'll be your co-pilot for today, Craig.
Yeah, brilliant.
How can we measure the success of brain-based programs?
Really good question. So I think brain-based programs, as a concept, brain-based learning is about thinking about how people are going to learn through this framework. So looking at the concepts of things like neuroplasticity and multisensory exploration. That I'd still say the measurement comes through the output and being really clear on what the learning outcomes are and the objectives and the intentions. So what's the behavioral change you're looking for? What's the measurable outputs and inconsequences? The brain-based learning is a framework to help you get from your starting point to that end measurable game. So if you're wanting to measure the efficacy specifically of when I use multisensory versus, single sense learning activities and content, then I think you're sort of going down a scientific research project route, which is great. And you want to have different, groups, test groups and pilot groups there to see what outcomes and impact you could measure through the two different methods. But if your question is more about, if I use that, will I still be able to measure the outcome? I'd just say it's really down to defining what your intended outcomes are for that training. Brain-based learning being a framework to help you achieve that. I hope that helped answer that to an extent. I'm more than happy to talk more about this as we go. So this is great. Please keep coming with your questions and do shout out and interrupt. I'm more than happy to be interrupted. If I'm not interrupted, I'll be a steam train and crack on. So following on from that, how do adults learn differently? So in the context of L&D and corporate learning and professional development, we are talking about adults. And learning is, there are all sorts of things that are important to learning, regardless of whether you're a child, an adult, or whatever it is. And some of the things we've just explored through brain-based learning are common throughout many theories of learning. And we discussed some of those, not least active learning being an important part of them. Key differences, though, are in the motivators. And we talked about motivators as being a blocker. So in adult-based learning, there's a theory is andragogy, is the theory of adult learning. So two people you might want to look at there is Malcolm Knowles is the sort of the godfather in the West of andragogy, and has written a lot about it, and a lot of people who then built on his concepts and explored that further. Another key thinker is Stephen Brookfield, who is a really good educator and learning designer, who's done a lot of work with andragogy and in the higher education sector, particularly in the field of feedback for engaging students and looking at critical incidents. So we've got a very, very close relationship with our individual students and keeping our finger on the pulse. And that individuality is something that's really important for me. Talked about people feeling safe, and we talked about differentiation, and every person is different. Every single person on earth is different, is going to have slightly different needs. To get the best impact, the best engagement, is really important to think about what are those individual needs and how can we differentiate and tailor the learning to support them where they are. But the key things with andragogy, as opposed to all the other things that are common throughout pedagogy and education in general, are for adults, on the whole, we need our learning to be just in time, not 6 months ahead of when we need it. We need the learning to happen when it's relevant, right now, when we've got an actual problem to solve. So are we addressing an immediate problem or not? If we're not addressing an immediate problem, if we don't perceive it as relevant, and if it's out of sync in time, any combination of those, adults, for the most part, will really struggle to motivate themselves to engage fully in a learning activity or a learning process. So it's really important, any takeaways, to think about those things when we're designing our L&D and CPD programs for our teams. When are they going to be appropriately deployed in relation to the needs and relevance of problems that need solving, which will be for the institution, for the organization. It'll also be for the teams, but it'll also be on an individual level. Even within a team, 3 individuals might have 3 different problems to solve in a wider institutional context. So try and think about lining up your timing so that they're really going in. You're saying, hey, you're starting this project. Here's a problem that we've identified that's going to be a challenge for you in this project. And here's some training that's going to get you ready to go out of the gates in 2 weeks' time. So really important to think about those things. Those are really the key differences. And as I mentioned, Stephen Brookfield, he has one of his concepts in keeping his finger on the pulse with his learners is CIQs, or critical incident questionnaires. Now, this is something that he runs at the end of every session he does with his teaching, whether it's students in higher education or staff development. The idea, I'm guessing most of us have been to an airport or a hotel lobby at some point in our lives. If we have, I'm sure we'll all be familiar with, as we're putting our belts and shoes back on and picking up our laptops and wallets and being ferried on down towards the gate, you're met at the exit of security with this little board with 3 faces on it, red, amber, and green, and they're asking you to give feedback just by hitting a button. We're not going to fill in questionnaires at security, but they do want to know, are we really happy with the time in security, or are we really dissatisfied, or somewhere in between? CIQs work on a similar basis. The concept there is the most important thing is to get feedback, not how extensive it is, not how detailed it is, but the frequency of it. The more frequently we get feedback, the more able we are to be agile in understanding our learners when they are engaged and when they're not engaged, and therefore what is impactful and what isn't impactful. So check him out, Stephen Brookfield, and CIQs, really worthwhile implementing that. And that's something that's very quick to take away and implement. So looking at behavioral change and NLP. So as mentioned, I'm a neurolinguistic programming master practitioner. And what does that mean? It's a bit of a mouthful, sounds a bit fancy, but it's neurolinguistic programming is about how our brain functions. And it's the combination of that brain functionality using models based on what works and sensory input. But it's also looking at the linguistic aspect. So how do we communicate? How do we work with language, and what impact does language have on us? And really great segue to that earlier when we touched on that linguistic aspect. The way we use language massively impacts the way we experience the world and the way we communicate and are understood. So how we communicate, we have filters in our brains filter things, and we have filters in language. And a key concept within NLP and the linguistic aspect is the idea of positive framing and how we use positive language, which has been proven to get better impact often than negative language. So an example would be, don't forget to sign your name at the bottom of the form, versus remember to sign your name at the bottom of the form, which is going to have a better impact. The thinking here with NLP is that negative words tend to be filtered by our brain. So if we have the word don't, we don't really know what to do with that. So we'll focus on the other thing, which means that we're focusing on the thing that we don't want to be focusing on. And that's not very good, is it? So we want to be focusing on the positive change and keep focusing on our goals. So if I say, don't think of a pink elephant, well, you've had to think of a pink elephant to not think about it, but now you're thinking about it, you can't stop. So instead of saying, don't think about a pink elephant, say, think about a dog on a green background, think about anything, think about a frog on a wall. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you don't say pink elephant, then the people won't be thinking about pink elephants. So it's that being mindful of how we use language and what kind of language is going to get certain responses.
One quick question there from somebody, Han again. How can we? So you probably might be able to read it, but how can we balance the stress? How can we balance the stress of an immediate problem that may hinder the motivation of learning something new? I think it relates to your previous slide where you were talking about, relevant in time kind of learning.
Really, really great question. And that is a challenge. So yes, stress is an inhibitor to learning and just in time. So I think it'd be really great to explore that through some scenarios later on if we have time. But to sort of freestyle an answer, I think part of that is down to team management and how we work with our teams and how we are managed by our line managers as well. So the idea of priorities and what can we take away? Is that thing that we need to do, that immediate problem to solve, the priority? In which case that learning to be able to solve that problem also is escalated to be a priority. So what do we then need to de-escalate and to move down or to deprioritize or to park or to delegate to somebody else or to load share to enable that to happen? And so I think suitable workloading is a key part of that, and being, in terms of project management, thinking about adjusting scope and revisiting priorities through that. So that's one way I'd look at it. There are other things that you can do, which I won't have time for today, but particularly with things like coaching and NLP, where you can look at reframing things and with that, moving stress out of situations to enable to create space and to create clarity, because often stress isn't an activity. Stress is a reaction. I think that's a key thing with that. Stress is our reaction to certain scenarios. Different people will react very differently to the same scenarios. Things that I find stressful, other people won't necessarily find stressful. But equally, I thrive on the adrenaline and the push of some things that will make other people feel really ill and really suffer from stress and anxiety, and that's fine. We're just different. We're all wired differently. So I think that's sorry to not be able to give you a more direct one, strapline answer there. I think it's a bit of a process one, but I think reframing and reprioritizing is my summary there. Another one with language is the idea of hypnotic language, and that again, that's I'll just leave that one there. But there's all sorts of stuff that that we say and in our language systems, in all sorts of languages, which have a hypnotic effect. And hypnotic effect is basically when we bypass the conscious filters to access the subconscious, and that means that we can get learning to happen. We can bypass blockers, and we can be more impactful with things by accessing the subconscious and bypassing the filters. Obviously, hypnosis has got a big name, both in terms of psychotherapy and also stage entertainment, with some hilarious effects. The thing with hypnosis is that we all do it all the time. We just often don't know that we're doing it. So the idea with starting to find out about hypnotic language through things like NLP is we start to realize when we can choose to do things in a certain way to get a certain effect or not, and with a caveat of always doing it with integrity. And programming, so neuro-linguistic programming. This, for me, this is the bit that I find really, really useful with NLP. It's this basic idea that if we can be programmed, learning is about programming, behaviors are about programming. If we can be programmed, therefore we can be reprogrammed. And that is a core concept with NLP, and something that I found really, really useful in my own personal development and professional development and in coaching others. If we can be programmed, we can reprogram. If I suffered from anxiety in a certain area, it's because circumstances through life have led me to be sensitive to those things. I can therefore reprogram that. Doesn't mean it's easy, doesn't mean it's a quick fix, but it is possible. And that is a really important thing to keep in mind with people's behaviors as well. Particularly in teams, you might have some people who have some difficult behaviors, or people aren't hitting target and performing to KPIs. It's not a lost cause. Again, it might take more or less work with different people, but there are tools and things we can do to explore how we can reprogram learnt behaviors. And another one with this is metaphors, and I've thrown in a couple of metaphors already, but metaphors are a really powerful way of sharing learning. NLP is built on 4 pillars or concepts. Rapport, so the idea of building close connection with people. And the important bit with rapport is there's lots of stuff under detail around it, but the important thing for me is about trust. If we have built a sense of personal connection, we trust people and we start to tap into unconscious modes of communication, which speeds things up. But the trust is the really important part there. It's about being outcome oriented. So we've talked a lot about outcomes and goals, and answer to Hans' question there. If you keep focused on your goals, you're more likely to get what you want. If you focus on what you don't want, you're going to get the things you don't want. And it's about where we put focus. Same thing applies when we're doing our learning design, learning development. Just keep the activities focused on the outcomes you want, not on the things you don't want. Just focus on what you do want. Awareness is a really big one. How aware are we of what's happening, of our own development, and behavioral flexibility? The idea that the more flexible we are, the more likely we are to get towards the desired outcomes. So looking so some summary stuff with this. NLP is about modeling effective changes, and I'll share a model with you later for you to take away and use and feedback afterwards, an example of a model. But it's basically lots of strategies of excellence that allow us to switch on and switch off really useful states on demand. It's about being in a state of curiosity, and it's a range of toolkits for change. It's closely related to CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's got a series of belief statements. Now, again, I think this is something that's really useful. Some people find this quite provocative. I use the belief, in those terms. They're also called suppositions, but I think they are useful because they are provocative and they provoke thought, they provoke discussion. And that's when we can start to change, when we hold something and experience it and navigate it and play with it like a Rubik's Cube. So some examples here of NLP belief statements or suppositions. As I read these, maybe you want to think about, do you feel this is true? Can you subscribe to these? If someone else can do it, I can do it. How does that land with you? If someone else can do it, I can do it.
I think it's circumstantial as well.
Yep, absolutely. There'll always lots of stuff around this, and that's the real fun, is when we start to explore the circumstances, the differences, the tweaks, and so on. For me, this one, I believe this, absolutely. It took me a long time to subscribe to it, and when I started to realize, for me, that yeah, if someone else can do it, I can do it, but it might take me a completely disproportionate amount of effort and time and resource to get to that thing. Doesn't mean I can't do it. I now choose not to do it because I don't think it's worth the investment, but it doesn't mean I can't. What I've got from that is a positive reframe in my attitude towards that thing. I've moved out of a state of saying can't do, or that's too difficult, into a state of curiosity, and therefore I'm more likely to maybe get some bits out of it, if not all. Here's another one. The map is not the territory. The map is not a territory. So if you think about the idea of a map of your country or your town, wherever you live, does that map, do they all look the same, first of all? And if not, why don't they look the same? And if you look at that map and you walk out your door and around that area, does what you see look like what's on the map? Doesn't usually. If it does, it's a very impressive map. Maps are representations of a reality. The territory is our reality. So the idea, this one's a bit more cryptic. The idea with this is to realize, we're talking about everyone has a different starting point, a different context, different experience. That what is true for one person isn't necessarily true for another. What looks like something on the surface for one person actually might have a very different territory underneath it. People's lived experiences of the world. So we can there are all sorts of memes on the internet where you've seen showing how you look at something from one angle and you see one thing, and you look at something from another angle and you see something completely different. The current one is Prince William in Britain, a photographer from one angle pulling his middle finger up at somebody, but when you see the same photograph from the other angle, he's actually holding 4 fingers up or doing that for A-OK, so something like that. 2 different perspectives of the same thing, you see a very different territory. So and the last one there is no failure, only feedback. That is going to be a key bit. So I'm mindful of time here. So I'm going to rush through some of this, but there is no failure, only feedback. So are we going to share slides with people after this?
Yes, if you're okay with it. Yeah.
Yeah, we can share a PDF so you can refer back to this. So again,
would people value the slides? I'm guessing so. Let me know in the chat. Also, one quick question, and I'm conscious of time as well. We've only got 10 minutes, and you've got an interesting case study that I would love for you to get through. Yep. Have you got 2 case studies, did you say?
I have, but yeah, let's take the question and then I'll plow on.
Yeah, and then maybe you can just deep dive into one of the case studies, because I've seen one of them, and I think it's quite awesome. So quick question from Jacob: how can people identify their blind spots, meaning they don't really understand things about themselves?
That's a fantastic question and a timely segue into the next slide, which I hope will answer your question, Jacob. So the awareness part of NLP is really important. It's crucial to behavioral change, because if we don't know there's an issue, we can't change it. If we don't know that there's an issue, we can't change it. If we're not aware of a behavior that we have that is problematic, where are we going to start if we don't know it's there? That is the biggest challenge in behavioral change, I believe, and it's the biggest challenge in managing other people's behavioral change from a line manager point of view, from a cultural change point of view, and from an L&D point of view. So then your question in your project isn't about how you teach people things, it's how do you get people to the point of even realizing there's a value in solving a problem they didn't even know was there.
Could I add to that, Craig? You've just
Yes.
sparked a big one in me, because this is, I'm so passionate about this one. A lot of, I think, managers and companies, they spend a lot of time in rushing to the solution too quickly.
Yeah.
And they try and identify the problem and then do the solution straight away in one go. They are two separate chunks. And sometimes I would dedicate disproportionate amount of time to this bit, because this is what we all often call buy-in, right? Like,
Yes.
are you bought into why we need digital transformation? Something I'm doing big in housing at the moment. And one of the, using your hypnotic language earlier, I didn't know it was hypnotic, it's giving me really good reference points. I started to frame it as a crisis. And it's really interesting. The word crisis invokes very different kind of response to people without really making them over worry and get stressed, which is what I would also say to them. But really great point. I just wanted to add that in there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Saad. So you may be well familiar with this concept, but just to clarify and refresh this idea, the four steps of consciousness around skills and learning. So the first step is unconsciously incompetent. We suck, but we don't know it. And that's the starting point. And that's the biggest leap to get across. So once we figured that out, we can start to help people become aware of their incompetence so that they become consciously incompetent. And once we become consciously incompetent, we're aware that we have a lacking skill or a skill that needs development. We're aware of that scope for development and the need to change. We can then do something about it. So we engage in learning through whatever forms we do that. And through that learning and through that practice and that teaching and repetition, we get to a point where we become consciously competent. We are aware, but we are competent now, not incompetent. We have developed skills, but it's a cognitive process. We're very aware of doing the thing. We think it through. It's a very proactive thing. Okay, I'm very mindful now to speak slowly, or to write in this way, or to lay out my spreadsheet in a certain way, whatever it might be. Consciously competent. The state that we really want to get people to when we move into that expert state is the state of being unconsciously competent. So this is when you move into your exemplar state, when we do things unconsciously. We're just really great at things. Look at top athletes. How do you ace that serve in Wimbledon? I don't know. I just do it, is the answer you'll probably get. How are you so good at public speaking? I don't know. I just do it. And one of the things with NLP is working backwards from unconscious competence to unpick the strategy. Really worthwhile being, that little model of the steps. If you're not familiar with it, to have that up on your board as a reminder for how to step people through, but also to just think about where are people in each learning activity or initiative? Where are the different individuals on that ladder? And those things link to what we talked about earlier, desire as well. And this is a really important concept within NLP and learning, is about the desire to change, and it's specifically behavioral change. If we don't want to change, it's an uphill battle stroke, you won't change. And this linking to language, if we say, I need to stop smoking, the chances are I'm not going to stop smoking. If I say I want to stop smoking and really believe that and internalize that, the chances are much greater that that behavioral change will take place. So I've put a link here. We'll share the slides. This has got URL link to it as well. But if you want to grab your phone quickly and scan it, this will take you to an NLP model that I have developed myself through my own research, which is about how to become grounded really quickly on demand. So within seconds, how you can become very, very present and grounded in a situation where you might be stressed or distracted. So speaking back to one of the questions previously about how do we marry up stress and learning, this tool hopefully will help you. So feel free to use and do feedback on the form if you listen to it. So just before we get to the case study, mentioned this before, really, really important part about learning is the daring to fail. This NLP concept of there is no failure without feedback, sorry, only feedback. But it's putting ourselves in that position where it doesn't go right, and we are actually presented with an opportunity to reflect and to try something out and to step back and to figure out what it was that didn't work. We learn from feedback, and it's really important to develop a mutual support culture of feedback so that people feel safe in taking risks. So feeling safe to fail means we feel safe to take a risk, and that has been proven to be a key part of creativity, which is important for learning, but also in success of businesses and organizations. So top tip here, you really improve your learning by celebrating failure, create a culture where people feel safe to try and to fail, encourage evaluation, sharing and feedback with that, but also lead by example. Show your own vulnerability, show your teams where you have also tried something and didn't go wrong, and ask them for their feedback as a way of helping them into that. So to jump in to this, mindful of time, an example here of something I've experienced. So this is in the context of higher education, and in higher education, it's quite common that lecturers will have their teaching observed by a peer on an annual basis so they can get feedback for the reasons we talked about in terms of awareness. What are the things that I'm doing which are really great that I wasn't aware of so I can do more of it? What are the things I'm doing which are maybe blocking things for students that I'm not aware of that I could change? And so that feedback is a really important problem. The problem I had here was the developmental feedback was inconsistent and untargeted. The observers tended to give feedback which was either entirely positive and therefore not much help because they were too awkward about sharing with a colleague saying, hey, you could do this better. Or they gave them so much feedback, they were overwhelmed and didn't know what to do with it. So they didn't know where to start, and it just went to the wayside. The behaviors were observers stated opinion as fact in their feedback and gave too much feedback. And what was the impact? Well, recipients became defensive and there was low impact on change. So what I did about this was I initiated a series of feedback calibration sessions for the observation team. And this was their learning by doing. This was experiential learning. We were talking about feedback theory and culture, but I was doing it through active learning and through processes of feedback where they got to role play feedback with each other in the session. And through that, reflect on what kinds of feedback were impactful and worked for them and what didn't, so that when they went out, they had an embodied understanding and feeling, going back to brain-based learning, they felt in their bodies what it was like to receive feedback inappropriately and appropriately. And the result was I got much more positive engagement in feedback receipt from the lecturers who were receiving the feedback. And it also had a visible knock-on impact on teaching, where teaching quality and feedback from students improved. So the feedback was demonstrated to have a positive knock-on effect into the classroom because it was being received in the right way. So we'll share the slides. I'll skip the second example just to wrap up some quick tools at the end because I'm mindful of time. So ask questions with your teams in learning. I find this, so this is drawing the concepts of coaching, and I find this very useful in my own teaching practice in higher education, but to ask questions of the people who are there. The reason asking questions is really important is because it empowers them and it helps you differentiate it. It helps you make the learning activity relevant to them. It helps them understand and realize what the problem is that they're trying to address, and therefore all of those things come together. And it also takes the workload off you. So ask questions more than telling people things. It's going to have a better impact. Get people to role play. If you're wanting to change, behaviors or cultures in a team, get them to role play it so that they're doing it in a safe space. They get to try it like you would rehearse a play before you go on stage. You practice your instrument before you play a concert. Get them to role play it, to try it out. I've done lots of role playing on both sides as the recipient and the facilitator, and I promise you it is way harder in role play than it is in reality. So if you're coaching people to have difficult conversations with their team, get them to try out having a difficult conversation with you on a script and give them scenarios. And so this is getting them to do the theory, it's getting them to do the experience. They're doing some of the teaching stuff. It's very active learning. It's sensory because you're in the room, you're talking with each other, touch, sight, sound, smell, the intensity of adrenaline. It's all there, highly impactful. Peer sharing is a really another great way to facilitate a different kind of impactful learning. Line up the different kinds of learning activities that people are engaged in, and then set up a structure where people get to teach each other and share. So if team A or person A has done a course in Excel or something exciting like that, rather than sending team B to do the same course, get team A to teach them what they've learned, because team A's learning will be compounded and enhanced by doing that, and you'll get a much more relevant learning from team B as well, whilst you're forging bonds between the teams. Delegate stepping up. So give tasks to team members where they get to take on responsibilities or tasks and things that would be in a different field to them or the area that you're wanting them to develop in. So rather than getting to talk about the theory of how to line manage, get them to practice line managing, rather than talking about the theory or sending them on a course on how to, I don't know, build a timetable, get them to go to the timetabling team and take responsibility for timetabling something in your college or university, whatever it might be. If it's sales, get them to go and sit in with the sales team and do some sales on the phone, rather than just sending them on a course about sales. So get them to do the thing, stepping up so they actually try to have a real world scenario. Finally, structure your feedback. Talked a lot about feedback here. It's really important to structure your feedback so that it has impact. And so this is an example. I'll unpack it a little bit more quickly. What I do with feedback is structure in these 3 points. What I noticed was, fill in the blank. An example of this is when you So you're telling them what it was you saw. You're saying what I noticed. You're not saying what it was. So again, I mentioned opinion as fact. This is my subjective opinion. So again, you know, safe spaces and so on. It's saying it's my personal opinion. It's not fact. So it makes it safer. It's less confrontational. What I noticed was, an example is when, and finally the impact was. Use those 3 things and you'll be on a success line for feedback. That went on way longer than I'd expected, but I'm really glad that we did have discussion along the way, because I think it was more, you know, speaking to the idea of relevance and timeliness of things and learning. You asked the questions and we had the chats around things as they came up. Happily, some things came in relevant to the slides anyway, so that was really great. So thanks for listening, and thanks for your questions and comments along the way. I'm happy to stick around for 10 minutes to take any questions or have a chat. So yes, over to you. Thank you very much.
Massive thank you, Craig. I mean, that was awesome. A couple of people have dropped off, but they said they enjoyed the session. I really did. I really love the unconsciously incompetent to consciously competent. And that's going to be my reading now. I absolutely love that. And it's a handheld process. So you're not just calling them incompetent, but it's actually a look in the mirror, but a supportive process. I absolutely love that. Any final questions from anybody? I'm conscious everyone's got to go. So any final questions? If not, we can leave it there. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks again, Craig. We've got a few more webinars coming out. We'll circulate the slide. We'll circulate the recording. Thanks, everyone. All the best.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sad. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Maria. Thank you, Maria.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks, Sharifa.